Welcome to the Holeinthewall Business Podcast with Bill and James. I'm James Groves, and along with my business partner, Bill Dement, we want to share our journey as small business owners with you. As owners of Holeinthewall Drywall Repair, we will attempt to peel back the curtain of owning a small business in the trade service industry and talk about the many adventures of owning a small business. Hey, Bill.
James, good morning to you.
Good morning. It's nice.
You know, recently we, as a company, we joined the Greater Orlando Builders Association.
Right.
And it's been a real boon for us. I'm very excited to be part of it. And you've been to one or two events with me as well.
Yeah, we had Wes Robbins here. His podcast just
great,
dropped.
just great guy. Yeah, he just dropped today, right? Yeah, that's terrific. So, but one of the first events I went to was at a steel company.
Right.
And at that event, I met this gentleman who's on the show today, and we're very honored to have him here. He's Mr. Don Strube. He's the co-founder of Florida Paints, and I'm just going to go ahead and bring him in and just say welcome to the podcast, Don.
Thanks for having me.
So happy to have you here.
So you didn't start out exactly with Florida Paints, right?
That's correct.
So give us a little bit of your background.
So I've been in paint pretty much my whole life. I was actually born in Centralia, Illinois. My mom and dad are Midwesterners. Dad was raised in St. Louis. My mom was in Des Moines, Iowa. And Dad had a crappy job with a little company. And when I was 2 months old, he told my wife, we're moving. And she said, why? And he said, well, you know, the weather's horrible here and my job's going nowhere. And she said, where are we going to move? And during the Korean War, he was in the Air Force. He was stationed in Morocco. And he loved the climate. And he loved the ocean. And he said he got a globe and he spun it and it went through Central Florida. And he said, let's move there. And he said, look, they got a big, beautiful lake, which was Lake Apopka, which is, you know, kind of a cesspool, but it looks pretty.
Better than it was now.
Better than it was, yeah. And he came with my uncle, and it's a long story how he got into paint, but he rented the building is still there on West Colonial Drive in Pine Hills, you know, a 20 by 20 room shop, and started making paint in a 50-gallon tank with a 7 horsepower motor. And
so how did he have information or experience to do that?
so the company he went to work for, they hired him when he was 23 years old to be I think they called him operations manager of their 8 manufacturing facilities that they had in Southern Illinois. And they were going to pay him, you know, $4,200 a year. And he was working for Shell Oil at the time. So he quit his job and he moves to Centralia. And he said he's looking at a map and he said, this can't be right, because he's driving down this dirt road through these cornfields and there's a sign, you know, Acme Manufacturing. And he pulls in and he said, there's these little, you know, 10 by 10 foot or 20 by 20 foot sheds that said manufacturing building number 1, building number 2, building number 3. And at the time they were still drilling for oil in the Midwest.
Okay.
And they were making what they claimed to be production enhancement additives. And he said, basically it was all snake oil, you know, and he said that this guy, he was a huckster. He said he knew he was in trouble, but one of the buildings had a little paint mill in it where they were making machine enamels, just, you know, protective oil-based stuff with probably lead and mercury and all the good stuff in it to keep metal from rusting. And my grandpa had a friend named Mel Caldwell. He had this company called Master Chem. And, you know, a lot of people may remember the name Kills. Kills was a primer. Oh, yeah. And Mel had started.
Well, that's still on the market currently, right?
And Mel started the brand Kills in St. Louis. So Dad's thinking, okay, I gotta figure an exit strategy, you know, and maybe I can do something with paint. And he would drive back to St. Louis on the weekends, and Mel would take him in his lab and teach him about paint chemistry. And, you know, he said, well, Florida seems like a good place to sell paint because, you know, everything's concrete and doesn't last very long. So that's how he started.
So I never realized that you could just make paint. I always thought it had to be some gigantic corporation that makes them. You know,
apparently all you need is 50-gallon buckets.
I guess it's kind of like moonshine, I guess.
Yeah, you know,
moonshine
I mean, you know, we had an opportunity to go to Greece about 5-6 years ago, and everything's lime wash, and I mean it's basically paint. But the reason everything was white when we were in Santorini in the Greek Isles, and it was because of the plague. And lime is God's fungustat, and that's why they painted everything white, because bacteria wouldn't grow on the lime wash.
I did not know that.
So you can, paint is basically, dirt, glue, and water.
Yeah.
It's just expensive dirt and expensive glue, and it's way more complicated than that. But yeah.
What was the name of the business that they started in the 20 by 20?
It was called Color Wheel.
All right, so that was the start of Color Wheel right there. Wow.
1960 BD, as we say, before Disney. So, But yeah, he's my daddy. He was a maverick, but we had a lot of blessings. Just the mere fact that he showed up in Central Florida before the boom. It was something.
And so during your growing up years and coming of age, you and your brother and probably other family members.
We had cousins. He brought, my uncle came, and my uncle had more of an accounting background, and Dad was he was one of those kind of guys. And they both grew up in the Depression, so they had to figure out how to fix stuff on their own,
right?
And, how to make stuff work. And Dad liked the challenges of that. So, but yeah, I'm the oldest of 5. All of the kids, we all worked in the business. But in the early days, I can remember the old paint color charts used to be these. They were, 4 inches wide, and they'd flip open, and the color chips that you see in a paint chart are actually ink. So he would order the chips, and we'd all go over to Grandma's house, and we'd sit in her. She lived in a mobile home. We'd sit around the kitchen table and glue all the chips on. I can remember Grandma get mad if we put the wrong colors next to them.
That's a great story. I love
so
that.
You're hand assembling your color chips. That's funny.
Wow. Yeah. What a rare opportunity, though, to work with that much family and be involved.
Yeah, it was fun. We all learned so much. We all spent time working in the factory. We had this production manager. His name was Dan Bryant, but I don't know why his nickname was Termite, but he was this little short Irish guy with a drinking problem, red hair, and he didn't like boss's kids, and he would give us I can remember my job one summer was he gave me a little scraper, and I was just on my hands and knees scraping all the dried chemicals off the concrete floor and trying not to get run over by the forklift. But
my word!
The opportunity there is when you're doing a job like that, you think, okay, I really got to get an education, so I'm not scraping floors the rest of my life.
Yeah, so it was an incentive.
It was very inspirational. I didn't know it at the time, but thank you, Termite, for making me scrape floors.
Right. Well, you didn't scrape always though with Color Wheel, right? You came up in the company to the point that you and your brother were just took over from your dad and your uncle. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was primarily my brother Rick and I we co-founded this company, Florida Paints, and then my 2 cousins, Steve and David. They were a little older than us, and we all had done every job in there. We'd worked at the store, we'd matched colors, we'd tint and paint, we worked in the plant. But we all kind of took different paths, and my path was kind of more on the sales and marketing side. My brother Rick was more operations and finance. Steve and David took over a lot of purchasing and dealing with vendors, and my cousin Steve, he managed the lab. He was also over finance, super brilliant guy. But yeah, we all just kind of took it in a different direction, and then I'd probably say when did I graduate from college? Probably early 80s, mid 80s. Dad and Uncle Charlie said, hey, we're going to give you boys an opportunity to grow the business. Go at it. So we started opening stores and growing the business. And when we sold the company in 2006, I think we were doing about $100 million a year in revenue, and we had 400 employees.
My word! And how big was your footprint at that point?
We were all over the Panhandle, Jacksonville, all the way down to Miami. Our business model was a little different. Dad and Charlie both were they were mostly interested in dealing with professionals. Although, we welcome retail consumers, they really wanted to deal with the professional contractor. So, brick and mortar is expensive. The next hardest thing to open in stores is finding the people to operate them for you. So we had some really, really big stores. We had some stores that we were running 10, 12 delivery vans out of, some stores that would have 30, 40 employees.
So let's go back to the growth real fast. So before you kind of started your journey with Color Wheel on that growth cycle. At what point, how big was the company?
Like I said, we were making 8 million gallons a year, which for a family-owned paint manufacturing company, and there used to be a lot of them. I remember I did a study one time in 1980. There were 2,000 paint manufacturing companies in the United States.
Is that right?
There were probably 30 in Florida that I can remember. 30 paint manufacturing companies.
So how were you all able to compete in that and just get a toehold to be able to succeed?
I mean, that's the magic of doing business, right? I mean, it's lots and lots of little things. You got to have, your core philosophy, obviously. We believe that everything we have is given to us by the grace of God, so then we need to be good stewards with it. And when he gives us the opportunity to be employers, then we need to be kind of shepherds and treat those people really well. You got to take a I am second kind of mentality. The other thing that was still is really important, you treat your customers really well, you treat your suppliers even better, and your suppliers are your lifeblood. You got to have good relationships with them, especially on the raw material side, because we are buying raw materials now. That business is consolidated a lot, and we're dealing with these global Fortune 50 type companies, Dow and BASF, and it's important that we have relationships. But our suppliers really, really helped us at Color Wheel. They helped us grow. And just because you're from a supplier standpoint, and these reps would tell me, he said, my biggest customers are not my favorite ones. I like to think that as a rep, all of my customers are equal, but some are more equal than others, and you guys are on the more equal list. So, when you're in a jam, when you get an allocation, short supply, going through COVID, we actually thrived through the COVID years. Our sales were up 36% in 2020 because we got raw material.
Oh, that's remarkable.
That was remarkable. Yeah, it was, and again, but there are all these little philosophies that helped us grow that business.
I want to come back to that because there was a huge issue with all the big suppliers through that I want to touch on.
There really was. Yeah.
I wrote it down because I want to go back there. When you started opening up brick and mortars, did you not have a brick and mortar initially with just wholesaling things out?
We had one location. Let's see. Dad built his second store in 1964. The building's still there on Silver Star Road, and that was a plant and a store in the front. And then we built another one in the 80s. But that one we had on Silver Star, we had a customer who was doing work in Jacksonville, and I remember I was in high school. So it was 1977. The guy said, "Hey, will you open a store in Jacksonville?" I said, "Okay." And then our next store, probably in 1980, was Daytona. And then we basically followed our customers around. And when I say our customers, at the time, the bulk of our business was new home construction. So, we would have relationships with, Syntex Homes was a big one back then. And Syntex, they'd have a division manager in Orlando, and he'd move to Jacksonville. And I'd say, "Man, I like the Color Wheel guys. Their paint is really good, but, their customer service is great. Their people are great." So we'd follow them around, and that's kind of how we grew organically, by following our customers. And it was a nice way to kind of get your foot in the ground.
It's funny because I was, we repaired drywall, and it was for years. We hate spot painting ceilings because it's 50 shades of white, right? And let's just ceiling white, and the customers don't understand that. Well, there's a lot of ceiling white out there. But what we found, it was 404, 401. Color Wheel.
It's magic. And you
what,
can't get anybody to
that's our 408 vinyl shell.
408, yeah.
408 vinyl shell.
Yeah. 408, I think, and 401. It was just, and we found it on a whim because, people had it. It was all right, so we would grab it. And then, of course, eventually Sherwin found the code for us, and we could kind of get it close to it.
But pretty close.
But we'd buy hundreds of gallons just to have to match ceiling paint.
Stuff touched up like a banshee, man.
Yeah,
it was great. Great product.
Yeah, it was like no one does that anymore. It drives me nuts because we don't have that standard.
Well, there's a lot of secret sauce in paint chemistry, and we We still have that sauce.
Yeah.
We may have sold the original sauce, but we have new and improved
Got a copy
sauce.
of the copy of the formula in the safe.
We'll figure out what Florida Paint's version of that is, and we'll go buy that.
If I tell you, I got to kill you. So.
Yeah, we'll just buy it from you.
There you go.
You don't got to kill me. It's good. We'll buy it. So as you grew, and then you started opening stores. So at its peak, how big was Color Wheel? And were you out of the state of Florida, or were you just in Florida only?
Mostly Florida.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, people focus on the top line on revenue, but let's think about it. Why are we in business? It's not what you sell; it's what you make.
That's right.
I got so many funny stories with Dad. I always, my mom was an artist. She paints, so I've always had a little bit of that creative side. And I remember when I got a marketing degree from FSU, and I went and moved to Colorado for a year and worked construction, and then was kind of a ski bum. But I missed the climate and I missed the family business, so I came back in, and I was in one of our stores, and this customer I'd known my whole life, Mike Young. He was just a typical painting contractor at the time. Good old Southern boy, very blunt. You wouldn't want to repeat what he said half the time, especially in front of a pastor. But our labels at the time, every product we had the same label on it, regardless of the price and the quality. And it had the state of Florida, and it said the word Color Wheel, and then were these vertical turquoise and white green stripes.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and I'm standing there looking at the label, and Mike walks up, and drinking a coffee and smoking a cigarette. Back then everybody smoked cigarettes in the stores. We had, I mean, it was old school. And he said, he called me Donnie. He said, Donnie, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm thinking of changing the labels, because our good stuff has the same label as the old stuff. And I said, what do you think of our labels, Mike? And he looks at them and he said, well, they're kind of like a naked 400-pound woman. They aren't real pretty to look at, but they sure get your attention. So I said, okay. So I went to Dad, and I said, Dad, we got to do something. We got a brand. We got to hire artists. We got to think big. We got to, we got to, we'll sell. We got to do this. And he looks at me, and he was reading, I don't know, the Orlando Sentinel, the business section. And he said, listen. And he turned, and it was perfect timing. Because I'd said, we need to be like General Electric. And he turns it around and says, GE posts record fourth quarter loss. He said, it ain't what you sell, it's what you make. So, that's the whole key to doing business. So the way we would grow our business, they were very bottom line oriented. They never had any debt. We never leveraged. We could have been a lot bigger company, but, because of the growing up in the Depression and, he used to tell us they'd have to go out in the field and, shoot a squirrel for dinner, or, whether it's true or not, I don't know. But we were, from a profitability standpoint, Color Wheel was very, very unusual. We were highly profitable. So, and it allowed us to try a lot of different things, to really invest where we wanted to invest, to make some really good mistakes, because, you don't always remember what you did right, but you rarely forget what you did wrong.
Boy, that's a true statement.
But yeah, it was, I kind of gauge it by people. We were at 400 employees, and that was the size of the company. And we still, to this day, we still have some second, third generation family employees working with us.
And were you doing all the manufacturing?
We did everything
in
ourselves.
Orlando?
In Orlando, and then we had, 5, 6 semi trucks shipping to all our stores, and it was, we can make it sound like a lot smarter than we really, we had this just-in-time philosophy, and that's because that's what needed to be done. I mean, none of us went to business, none of us had MBAs.
Yeah.
You just figure out how to get it done.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
Well, necessity is the mother of
Absolutely.
invention, right? So you have a need, you just work through it. It's not about having the knowledge to fix the need. It's about having the gumption to just to figure it out on your own. So I think that's great. When you are thinking about the growth, were you ever thinking about exit strategy? Or was it always just about, we're just going to grow this thing and just ride the wheels off it?
No, I mean, and again, I think, I think the wonderful thing about those times was we didn't have the internet. I mean, the way you figure things out is by communicating with people, and don't get me wrong, I'm the biggest tech head in the world. I've still got I still have my original Mac SE, the little square box with the 4-inch screen.
Yeah,
I paid $3,400 for that thing in
God.
1984. My wife was not happy. I mean, that's like spending $10,000 on a little, and it had a 128K floppy drive. So I love technology, but, it seems to me, I always hear, young kids coming out of school talking about exit strategy. I said, well, what's the goal of the business? You start a business, you grow it, you make it profitable, and you sell it off. Well, I mean, that's not the way we were brought up, I mean, a business was, it was your lifeblood for yourself, for your employees, for your community. So, no, we didn't. To answer your question, we didn't really think about exit strategy other than death. I mean, there's always succession planning. And
well, I know you mentioned in the pre-show that it's a rare company that's able to succeed into the third generation.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, there's a lot of challenges. I mean, the best people to work with are your family. The worst people to work with are your family at times, because you can't leave it at the office sometimes. And every family business has those stories. You have your ups and downs, but you just got to keep it in check. But it's that kind of going back to we were talking about the COMEX people, what they did.
And that's who you initially.
That's how we sold Color World to. But they had this big giant paint company, and they're based out of Mexico City, and Mexico is going through a recession every 5 years, and they had at one point where they were, they had 400 or 500 stores in Mexico, and they fired everybody, and then they said, if you want to stay in the paint business, we're going to sell you our store, for $1, but you have to buy from us, and you have all these rules. So what happened was, they went from being employees to family-run businesses, and where they thrived was, when things got busy, the mother-in-law would come help out, and on the weekends, they got rid of the janitor service. They did it all themselves, and that is one of the. And they called them concesionarios. No habla español, but basically they were dealers that were tightly married to the company, but they grew it into a mega thing.
It's really great, because there's another restaurant that I know on the West Coast called Roberto's Taco Shop, and every location is run by a different family.
Yeah.
And so everyone runs it, moms, grandmas, uncles, nephews. They're 24/7, so they had to be a big family. And they would just put families in charge of the stores, and they share in the profits, whole 9 yards. And every store thrives. Yeah. And when you have skin in the game like they did, right? Yeah. So then all of a sudden you've got skin in the game, so it's not just a job anymore.
And we kind of did that at Color Wheel, because what we did with our stores was we would have a store manager and a field sales rep, and they were basically partners. And they got paid a nice salary, but their opportunity to earn extra was based on the bottom line and not off the top line. So it was kind of a profit sharing type program. And back then, if somebody wanted to bring their 9-year-old kid to come in and work, no one was going to call OSHA on them or anything like that. But you would have these teams, and if you'd find the right pair of business partners, say, look, man, I mean, you have our guidelines, our core philosophy, we have obviously what's ethical, but there's also what's moral. So you stick with that, but do what you got to do. And we had some stores that, I mean, these places were dives. They were, they looked horrible. They were really bending a lot of rules on cleanliness and policy and things like, we call it hanging tickets. If somebody couldn't pay their bill, they'd be on credit hold. Well, they'd still let them take paint and trust them. But, it is, they were making a lot of good money for the company. So you just kind of let them run it, because every marketplace is a little different. Tampa's different from Orlando. Orlando's different from Jacksonville. Jacksonville's different from Miami. They all have, unique cultures, and then the cultures that you find yourself doing business with. So, sometimes just having this big corporate handbook, it doesn't work. And to a point, now you can get really big, and then you got to start pulling it back in.
Yeah.
But, but we got away with that. Yeah.
So at the time of the sale, how many stores did you have?
40.
Wow. Okay.
And what year was that when you all sold?
That was 2006.
So I'd like to dig about the sale real quick, because I'm just curious. Did you go seeking? Did you have a for sale sign on the business, or did they come find you?
Not really. I mean, they had, what had happened was, so briefly, COMEX, Pinturas COMEX was the largest privately held paint manufacturer based in Mexico. And in the early 2000s, they wanted to expand into North America. So they started purchasing some companies that were based west of the Mississippi. And they were very similar to us. A lot of them were still family owned. And we have, and we still to this day, we have these co-ops where, in our world, if you're a smaller, even a good size privately held paint manufacturer, we bond together to do things like buying our raw materials. We have this co-op called Guild CPO that I think there's about 150 members, most in paint, some in inks, some are based in Europe. But collectively we do, I don't know, $3.5–4 billion a year in revenue. So we buy our raw materials together. And then we do the same thing in kind of our sundry purchasing and our color systems. When you come up with a new color system, it's really expensive. And, it costs, probably $1 million in today's money to come up with a whole new system. So we subscribe to a color system. So we do all these things. But the cool thing about that relationship is you get to know these other business operators. And, you go to your meetings in the day, and then you go to dinner at night, and, you sit around and have a few beers or a couple of bourbons and say, man, I'm having a problem with, I can't figure out how to get the touch-up to work on my product. And it's like, yeah, we've had the same problem. Maybe you need to use, some more diatomaceous clay or try Minex or do all that stuff. And, it's great because you're sharing each other's win. A smart man learns by his mistakes, but a wise man learns by the mistakes of others. So anyways, COMEX started buying these guys up, and they came to us and they said, hey, they'd really, what you've got going on in Florida really, fits into our business plan. Would you guys be interested? And, I think what happened was on the family side, we were doing great, but I think part of the family was a little trepidatious about growing the business because, they knew what the odds were. And then the other thing is, when you get to a certain level, you got to bring in a whole different set of operating procedures, mid-level management, KPIs, metrics. And if you're the kind of person that really is excited about running a business like that, that's great. But quite honestly, most of us weren't. We were guys that just like to talk to customers and, match colors and go out and sell paint. So, and it was they made us a really, really handsome offer. And most of our business was new home construction. We were thinking, man, it looks like there's a bubble here. We're overdue because there's always a bubble. We had no idea that the bubble was going to be as big as it was.
And it was just around the corner, wasn't it?
It was just around the corner, yeah. Our sales had gone up every month since May of 1991 until we closed in June of 2006. And July of 2006, the sales went down.
Yeah, it was already starting.
Yeah, that was the grace of God that made that happen. But, it was just... And it took a long time to happen. It took us a year we had some environmental issues with the plant because back then, we weren't into heavy chemicals, but we had solvents and stuff.
Yeah.
And back in the 60s, you'd ask the guy from the city of Orlando, hey, I got a bunch of vinyl toluene or whatever sitting around a drum. What should I do with it? He goes, throw it in the ditch. That's what they told you to do. And it wasn't a big issue, but it's just all those little things.
Right.
But yeah, it came to fruition, and it worked out really well in the beginning. But then the end started happening in 2007, 2008, and that was tough.
It was hard.
Yeah.
Did you know that there are over 140 million homes in the U.S.? 97% of them have walls and ceilings that are built using drywall. The drywall repair industry is simply enormous, valued at over $13 billion a year. We're Holeinthewall Drywall Repair. And for years, we have been perfecting the art of repairing drywall, developing and refining our systems, and strengthening our brand. Our business model is simple, scalable, and easy to learn. We believe it's a real game changer. We are successful drywall repair pros who decided to take our repair business to a higher level growing both our franchise training and support to industry-leading standards. You'll benefit from our vast experience helping your franchise hit the ground running and achieve success quickly. We'll give you access to our marketing team that has created strategic programs designed to get your phone ringing and booking new business fast. Join a fast-growing leader in an exciting dynamic segment of the home service industry by franchising with Holeinthewall Drywall Repair. Start building your own business and securing your own financial future today. So you've sold. They retain, I'm sure, some of the family as employees of the company.
Yes.
And what was your title back then, working for?
I don't know. I think I lost the toss, and I was the CEO. None of us ever like being the president or the CEO because everybody calls you when something's wrong.
Yeah,
so
right.
I think I was the CEO at the time of the sale.
Okay, so they kept you.
But we
around.
all traded. Yeah, my brother Rick and Steve, our cousin, we all took turns kind of the time.
And how long did you stay?
It wasn't too long. It was maybe, I don't know, 40 hours a week. It was, I think Rick and I stayed. Steve and David, they're older than us. They didn't stay on because they were in their 50s and they were looking to do other things, enjoy life a little more, and spend more time with their kids, which is awesome. And we probably stayed out for a year, maybe a year and a half.
Yeah, okay, so not too much.
And it was different. I mentioned this to you before. What's it like? And when you are working for somebody that's a non-family member, and I really liked the family that owned COMEX. They were really good people, very innovative. They would bring in, because Europe has always been kind of a leader in technologies in the paint and coatings industry, and they were bringing in all kinds of cool ideas but I had this guy who was a really good guy, but he was very metric oriented. I mean, they would make us do these forecast sheets that were like, okay, where are you going to be in 3 months? We need a 3-month plan, 6-month plan, 12-month plan, 1-year plan, 5-year plan. You'd have to do that every month. And fortunately, I was really good at Microsoft Excel, so I figured out how to automate a lot of the stuff. But, I get planning, but somebody asked me, how do you like working for your new boss? And I thought about it. And I said, well, when my old boss was a butthead, I could call my mom and get him to back off. But I don't know this guy's wife, so I'll have to get back with you on that one. And he actually ended up leaving. So it was a bad time. And we stayed on for a while as consultants, but it was just bad. And I will have to say that the people at COMEX did everything they could do to give people an opportunity to ride out the storm, but it was just too tough.
Yeah.
Because all of our business, I want to say 80% of our business was new home construction.
Oh, my.
And when that mortgage crisis hit, it just all came to a screeching halt.
Oh, yeah, completely.
Yeah, it still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up.
And so when you left, I'm sure they had a non-compete. So you had probably a year or two that you couldn't work in the paint business?
Yeah, we'd signed a 5-year non-compete. Wow. And it was a cash out deal. It was there wasn't any earnouts, which, when people ask me, I'm thinking about selling my business, and they're giving me an opportunity. Sounds really good, but, I got to hit certain milestones to hit my full earnout potential. I just caution them and say, look, how well do you really know these people you're selling to? And, plans are made to be broken. So think about that. Sometimes you're better off taking a little less, but don't buy a 60-foot boat based on your earnout when you're going to end up money for a 30-foot one, maybe. Don't put yourself in that situation. Yeah. But it was a good deal. And after 5 years, we were free.
Yeah. And then at that age, you're not a young guy at that point. You're probably. I
was 46, 47.
So you thought, heck, let's just do it again.
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny because I remember I was out in Mosquito Lagoon. I got into paddleboarding, and I built this paddleboard that I could go red fishing on. And it's cool catching a redfish on a stand-up paddleboard and getting it to drag you around. And I caught this big old red, and I texted a picture of it to my friends. It's like on a Tuesday at 1 o'clock, and one of the guys texts me back with a picture of his bird finger, So it's like, it's no fun hunting and fishing by yourself, right? And my brother and I, we were staying busy. I mean, the biggest blessing, I think, at the time was he has 2 daughters. I have 4. And we got to spend a lot of time with them. They were still in grade school. So we got to take them to school and go to the soccer games. Because Color Wheel, we were traveling a lot, I mean, we were always, I remember after Hurricane Andrew, it was in 1992, I'd get up at 5 in the morning and, drive to Miami and do business all day long and drive back. And sometimes I'd do that a couple times a week. And, I was young. I had the energy to do it. But yeah, but we had 2 guys that worked with us. Our current president, Jeff Grasty, who came to work straight out of college with Color Wheel as a delivery driver. He was running the Color Wheel, the old Color Wheel for COMEX, and then Mike Davis, who had worked with us for a long time. Rick and I had a little office down off Edgewater Drive. We were doing some real estate stuff in a little family office. And the nice thing was we lived in Windermere. It's far enough away from our house that our wives couldn't make us come home and clog the toilet.
Someone told me every man needs an office to go to.
Yeah, and our kids went to school downtown. Yeah. So Mike and Jeff started coming to us and said, man, things are not going well with COMEX. I mean, it's just, they're bringing in people from outside of the industry to, call the shots. They're changing their North America presidency. Let's get the old team and start up again. And we thought about it. This was probably 2010, something like that. And so let's see, our non-compete was up. Yeah, it's right about right. 2010, 2011. Rick and Dad and myself and Fred Stewart, who was our technical director, that Dad had hired in the 80s, probably the smartest paint chemist. And our suppliers would tell us this guy was brilliant. Never went to college. He was self-taught, I mean, they said he's the best formulator east of the Mississippi. We set up this little lab we had this little strip center that we owned with some friends over off Lee Road, and there was an empty bay in there. And this is funny. So we start gathering old mills and, we were buying stuff off eBay, all this junky equipment, and I'm in there one Saturday, and we had sold the formulas from Color Wheel, so we had to rebuild them all.
Okay,
I mean, we didn't want to get sued. I mean, if we're going to start a paint company, like we got to create new formulas
from scratch.
A lot of it was in Fred and Dad's head. Actually, that's where I learned the most about paint chemistry was that year span when Rick and I were sitting in there making formulas with Fred. But anyways, I'm in there on a Saturday, and I'm screwing in these old beat-up cabinets I bought from Lowe's that were rejects, and the bay was next to a chiropractic clinic, and I had this screw gun going through these metal studs, and it's making all this racket, and I hear this banging on the back door, and I'm wearing grubby clothes, probably hadn't shaved in a while, and I opened the door, and the lady said, what are you doing in here? I'm trying to do massage therapy at the clinic next door. You're making too much noise. I said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm setting up a lab. And that's right when Breaking Bad was kind of the show. And she looks inside, and there's like these scales, and I got these bags of powder, all this pigment. And,
that's great.
All these beakers and Bunsen burners, and her eyes get real big. And I'm thinking, I better get the hell out of here because somebody's going to call the cops. But we spent 10 months rebuilding the formulas.
Wow. And, I'm curious, though, from the original formulas that you had, that would have been 30, 40 years prior, was there a lot of advancement or changes in the chemistry and formulations?
That's kind of interesting because I think, the chemistry side, I mean, it's simple, but it's not because, we're all buying the same. Well, in the old days at Color Wheel, the tank car would come down. Most of the emulsions that we buy, the binders, it's basically it's the plastic that holds the paint together. We had rail, we'd buy in tank cars, and it would stop at our plant. We had a rail siding, and it would stop at our plant on Silver Star, and they'd pump off, I don't know, probably 20, 30,000 gallons. And then it would go down the road to the Sherwin-Williams plant and pump off another 30,000. And then it would go down the road to MAB was a brand that was around. They were down a Rocket. Yeah. So, we're buying a lot of the same stuff, but it's the secret spices that make it happen, and it's your defoamers, your flatting agents, your rheology modifiers, all the things that give a paint formula can have sometimes 25 different raw materials in it, even more, but 98% of the volume will be your pigments and your binders, your emulsions, and that may only take up 4 or 5. But, that's what makes I keep saying secret sauce. It's funny. Our biggest competitor, and they're a great company, is Sherwin-Williams. They're a powerhouse. They're very well run. I actually have. So when we sold to COMEX, I had a 401k with COMEX, and then COMEX sold to Sherwin-Williams, and I still have some 401k money with Sherwin-Williams. And my financial advisor says, why do you have this? I said, well, I get all the reports, so that's good. I get the big, thick binders. But it's a great performing company. Yeah. But they're different, I say, they're the Taco Bell of the paint business. We're the taco-ria. And, it's that's how we formulate our products, based on firsthand knowledge, owners of this company talking to customers and say, well, this product doesn't touch up real well, or it's got too much brush drag, or it fish eyes sometimes, but that's how we were taught to build a paint product. So, back in the Breaking Bad lab, that's what we were doing. It took a long time. We made probably on a little quart mill, making a quart at a time, probably at least 1,000 different formulas just to get started. And we still do that today. We're always coming up with new products. Right? And to answer your original question, the industry, it seems like every 10 or 15 years, there may be something new that'll happen, but, then it'll just kind of, I guess it's like a caterpillar, builds a cocoon and sits there for a long time, and then something blossoms. Yeah. And right now there's some new technologies that are coming out that's pretty cool. So when we did reformulate, we got to use new technology because our old color wheel formulas needed to be rebuilt anyways.
Right. So what did the genesis look like? What you guys started Florida Paints, and then what did that look like? Did you start with manufacturing first and retail, or did that come same time?
Well, we've been really blessed. One thing that happened was, you're familiar with the Villages, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
we have a franchisee there.
Yeah. We had a relationship with the Morse family who, before it was the Villages, it was called Orange Blossom Gardens, and it was a trailer park up on 441 at Lady Lake, and we were selling a maintenance paint. And then when they started developing the Villages, they actually came to us and gave us an opportunity to supply them with some product. And the product that they wanted us to use, we knew it was an elastomeric coating, and we knew it was the wrong product. But they said, hey, if we don't buy it from you, we'll buy it from somebody else. So we sold it to them, and they started by building these retaining walls around the roads, these 8-foot-high block walls, and they were stuccoed on one side. And the painters did a really good job of putting a lot of elastomeric coating on there. But, elastomeric is kind of a cross between like a caulking and a paint. It's very flexible. It does a great job of keeping water out, but it also does a great job of keeping water in.
Yeah, it won't penetrate it.
Right. So I remember a rep called us, said, we got a problem at this new place called the Villages. And I go up there, and there's like 2 miles of wall with these giant water balloons on them that are all blistering. And, there was a lot of yelling and screaming, but the guy's name was Rick Murray. He was like one of the first employees that the Morse family brought down. They were from Michigan. He was just an old school rough guy, and, we yelled and screamed. We talked about calling lawyers, but we ended up both admitting that we both made a mistake, so we shared. And it was really expensive at the time to solve that problem. But it started a beautiful relationship. So, we still to this day we're the sole paint supplier for the Villages. And when we sold Color Wheel, they weren't happy with what had happened. And they said, hey, we heard you guys are starting a new company. Do you want to sell paint to the Villages? And it's like, yeah, we're ready, which we kind of weren't. We didn't even have our plan up. But they said, well, you got to do it now. And we actually had somebody else toll manufacturing our paint products at another manufacturing company in Florida. It was our formula. But we started out at 100 miles an hour. They were building, I don't know, probably 100 houses, 150 a month, something like that. So that got us going. So our first store was, we opened a store up at the Villages, and then we opened a couple here in Orlando. And that was in 2000. 2012.
And the rest is history, isn't it?
Well, we're still making history. Yeah.
So there was a big freeze in Texas a while back. Remember that? What year was that? 2020?
2020, March.
Yeah, I think it
2020.
was.
And so obviously we do a lot of work with Sherwin, and one of our top ceiling paints we were using, all of a sudden whatever that plant was manufacturing ended a ton of supplies. Did that affect you guys at all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was chaos, but it was awesome.
Yeah.
Because
What was the plant? What did they produce?
so when you look at what happened was when you look at, and I'll just, to keep it simple, just talk about, waterborne paints. You have basically, the pigments, which are titanium dioxide, calcium carbonate, diatomaceous clay, silicates, zinc oxide, all different types of pigments. But then, that pigment goes on a surface. Well, you got to hold it together with something, and you got to get it to stick to the surface. So you use the emulsions, and the emulsions are 100% acrylics, vinyl acrylics, styrene acrylics, and those are all derivatives of petroleum. So when you get a barrel of oil and you put it in a refinery and you start breaking it down, probably the biggest demand is going to be for gasoline, obviously, and then you've got diesel, and then you've got bunker C for industry, you've got jet, but all these byproducts that keep coming out, and the only class I ever failed in 16 years of school is chemistry, so I'm not real good at this stuff. But you get these molecules that create monomers and polymers, and those are the feedstock for the emulsions that they make, that we use in paint, which is kind of looks like Elmer's glue, right? And when they had the freeze in Texas, everything was powered by wind. They didn't have enough energy to power the heating elements that went around the pipes of the refineries because the windmills froze. So what happened was there was no feedstock to make emulsion. And I'm not sure about this, but I know a lot of the big guys either made their own emulsions, or they didn't have super relationships with the raw material suppliers. So it was in short supply, but most of our emulsions we were buying from, the big guys like Dow and BASF, so they could pull from other places.
Right.
And what happened with us was we got raw material to make product, and unfortunately, the big guys didn't. So people that would normally not buy from us were coming to our stores, and we took care of our customers first, and we had to make some changes. There were some, we buy our core emulsion packages. There's probably 15 or 20 that we use, and some of them might come up short, but it was hard.
Yeah.
But
That was an interesting time. So I'm curious, how are you guys sort of structured now? Like, where do you stand today? I know you have multiple retail stores. Do you still do production out of one facility?
Yeah, we started with a little building over 441 Lee Road in Orlando, just kind of an old junky building, a couple mills, and then in 2016 we bought, at one time it was the oldest fresh fruit packing house in the country in Winter Garden, Florida. So it was an old orange packing house. And, we love Winter Garden. It's a great area. So we're making everything there. We've got 80,000 feet where our current plant is with distribution, our corporate offices, and we're getting ready to add another 40. And then we ship out to all of our stores.
Is this a similar strategy that you had with Color Wheeled, is to kind of
Yeah.
permeate Florida?
Yeah, kind of, but we are getting into the dealer business. So in the paint world, you have corporate stores, you have like Sherwin-Williams and PPG, and then you have independent dealers. Benjamin Moore, everybody is familiar with that name. Well, Benjamin Moore they might have, most of their products are sold through independent dealers, and they will sell different lines. Benjamin Moore will be a primary one, and then they might have some second lines. And then you've got your big box guys. You got Lowe's and Home Depot. They sell an unbelievable amount of paint. But we're starting to supply a lot of the independent dealers. We've seen an opportunity for that.
So that's what they would call like white label?
Yeah. Yeah, it's our own brand. So we actually we've got a dealer in Panama that's doing real well. We're shipping a lot to the Caribbean because our products are formulated to thrive in a southern environment. The big national brands, they pretty much have the same formula nationwide. So,
okay, that's interesting.
Their paint is going to our paint is going to do better in a southern environment than theirs. but it's not going to do as good as theirs in Minnesota. So, they're finding that right balance.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're doing real well in the dealer market, and we do some private label and toll manufacturing. And then we're getting more and more into commercial repaint, condo repaints. We've got doing a lot of work with the residential repaint through the HOA, Community Association Management channel. So we're branching out. And the thing about paint is it's heavy and it's relatively inexpensive, which is good for us because it's to be competitive, to ship something in from China or Europe, there's not enough money in it. But you really it can be kind of tough to supply when you get more than 500 or 800 miles away from your plant. And
Do you find that the raw materials that you guys use, are they domestically produced?
we try and buy domestic,
Okay.
wherever we can. I mean, there's some, I'll call them the spices or the salt and pepper items. There's some things that come from Europe. We did titanium dioxide, which is the prime pigment. That's the most expensive pigment, and it's used in everything. It's what gives you durability and hiding power. Titanium's in, plastic, paper, everything.
It's in golf balls, I heard.
It's in everything, yeah. But it's expensive, and during the shortage, and a lot of it was, and I remember the titanium shortage during COVID was mostly because of the logistics issues, because most of it that we supply comes from southern Louisiana, Lake Charles, Louisiana, but you couldn't get it. And it was hard because all the truck drivers were locked up. And a lot of guys were buying from China, and we bought some from China, and you guys know better than I do, but I still remember those Chinese drywall stories.
Oh, yeah, they were awful.
So, I mean, we're made in America. We like to buy domestic whenever we can, and we make every opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, let's just think about if you had some words of wisdom for someone who wanted to start a business and, they're good at XYZ, whether it's lawnmowers or whether it's creating some sort of, IT or chemical plant. What is something that you would tell them that are kind of non-negotiables? Just something like the philosophy or something that you would just, words of wisdom. I got a couple of my own, but I'm curious what yours would be.
Well, do the right thing, period. You just got to do the right thing. I mean, everybody makes a mistake. There's always times when, at all best intentions, you're going to mess up. And sometimes it's painful to admit it, and sometimes it's expensive to own up to it. But, the funny thing is, if you and the people that you work with demonstrate a lot of integrity in what you do, people will talk. That's how you grow organically, because people do business with people, and so just focus on that. I mean, get a good plan, be honest with numbers, be really careful about what you see in social media or on the internet, because all that's out there are success stories. There's not I don't know if there's the failure channel. There probably ought to be. Why I failed at business, but there's a lot of lessons to be learned there.
Yeah, right.
So that's part of it, And, a lot of people say, well, I want to start something new. Well, there's a lot of stuff that's, it's what you're doing with a hole in the wall. Your guys, people have been patching holes in drywall just like they've been, I think they've been painting walls because they didn't have drywall back in Roman times.
Yeah.
But you figure out a better way to do it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a tremendous opportunity to find things that are already out there and improve the process, improve the technique. And then the other thing is, I have 4 daughters, and they're all in their late 20s, early 30s, and I hear with their friends. I used to hear it more when they're in their 20s. They said, "Well, I want to do something that I'm passionate about. I want to have," and it's like, I got to be honest with you, that's not a reality. You got to figure out how to bring passion to what you're doing, And I'll be honest with you, I don't wake up in the morning and think, "Oh, I can't wait to go see the paint cans."
I love that take, Don. I love that take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the passion philosophy is a little unrealistic.
It's kind of altruistic.
I'm passionate about eating hot dogs, but I can't make a living out of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sounds like, I know you guys are guitar players or bass players. Me too. I always wanted to be up on stage, but, my best shot up on stage was pushing the mop after the band was gone. I mean, I was never good enough, but you just, and my brother and I and all of our people, we have a passion for doing business because it's fun. And, you think about the trickle down from what we do. So we're providing a really good product and a really good service for people. We're giving them an alternative, and we're providing jobs for people, So we have, 220 employees and then their families. So, our goal is to make sure we can give them a really opportunity to grow, do different things, but it's just, it's fun. That's what's exciting.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I just want to say, Don, thank you for taking the time being on the podcast today. I knew it was going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks. You guys are cool.
I look forward to getting to know you better as time goes on. Yeah. We didn't get into GOBA or any of that stuff, but I know I'll be seeing you around there.
By quick. It was fun.
If somebody wanted to get a hold of you, what's a good way for them to reach out to you?
FloridaPaints.com. Log on our website. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook. We've got some, we love selling paint to anybody and everybody. Obviously, we like to deal with professionals, but, we're still kind of old school. We still match colors by eye, we just, we like to say paint a brighter day, with our product.
I like that.
I mean, color brings smiles to people, and we love what we do, and love to hear from you.
Well, we certainly wish you all the best.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
very much. All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We'd like to thank you for listening to the Holeinthewall Business Podcast with Bill and James. We'd love for you to join our Facebook group and keep the conversation going. If you'd like to learn more about us and our business, check us out at holeinthewall.com. If you'd like to learn more about how to start a Hole in the Wall franchise, go to holeinthewallfranchising.com.